Where was home when you were born?
Faulkner Street,
What was the address?
upstairs.
You remember the address?
Um, 126, I think it was.
126?
Oh, yeah. Like Potato Bug Bill. Remember that story what Grandpa said?
No.
Potato Bug Bill. He was the toughest kid in town. He lived in the toughest section of town, lived in the toughest street in town, the last house on that street, and upstairs. That's Potato Bug Bill. That was Otto's story.
Now, why did Grandpa come to Jamestown?
Well, he got out of...
Why did your dad come to Jamestown?
Yeah, right. He got out of service, and he was single, of course, and he went out and visited his brother Oscar out in state of Washington in Walla Walla, and he ran or rented out and ran it pool room out there. So he was some kind of a hustler, I guess. He was a pretty good pool player, I guess, and so was Oscar. And he ran that for a while, and I don't know whatever happened. He never talked much about it. And he came back to this part of the country, and Jamestown then, furniture industry was thriving, so he went to work in a factory. And he'd been wounded, of course, you know, had bad lungs from being gassed and all that stuff there. And the dust in the factory bothered him, and he, of course, ended up somehow going to a doctor. The doctor said, you got to get out, you got to work outside. And Dad said, well, you know, I don't know any, I mean, my job, I got to make a living. Well, he said, you got to find something else. So he told the guy that owned the business that he had to leave. And in the meantime, had scouted around and found out he could sell furniture for somebody. And this was Lyle Johnson, and he told Otto, he says, you don't know how to sell furniture. He says, you stick with me, and I'll make you a foreman, and you'll do well in the factory.
You know what factory it was?
Elite, I think. I think that was the name of it. I'm not sure. But Dad left, and of course, the nice part of that story is he did become a successful salesman, and it wasn't too many years ago. Lyle Johnson came to Dad and wanted him to handle his line.
Okay.
And that made Dad feel pretty good. But he did that for, what, 40 years? I guess he sold furniture.
What was his first job outside of the factory? So he went from Elite. Do you know what he sold?
Well, that was it. He became a furniture salesman. I don't know who he started selling for, but it was somebody. He's in Jamestown here. And he ended up selling for Monitor, Banstein Beds, S.A. Cook, which is an upholstered goods. They were out of Medina, New York. And then he had that Kentucky Art Galleries. You remember that? Mm-hmm. And that was later in life. And he made a few bucks selling those pictures. And Advanced Furniture, I didn't mention that. That was his big one for a long time. They made very fine furniture. And my uncle was the veneer matcher there, Dick, Grandma's brother, and Fred Carlson, my grandfather, on her side, he worked there. And I worked there. Donnie Nagel and I worked there one summer. Advanced Furniture, run by Joe Carlson. Mm-hmm. And he's the guy, the story goes, that the insurance company came down, and a guy had cut his finger off. And he came down to Joe, and they wanted to get the facts of how this accident happened before they're going to pay any claim. And Joe said, I'll take you out in the factory and show you, he says. So he did, and he grabbed the board, and he says, the dang fool, he says, he just did this. And he cut his finger off right in front of the insurance guy. He claimed that's a true story. A mistake. But that was really, I think our Advanced Furniture was probably our livelihood, mainly. They were big. Pittsburgh was his main city.
What was his territory?
Western Pennsylvania.
Was it? Yeah.
Plus he had, for certain lines, he had Scranton and Wilkesboro, some eastern stuff, and that was a 2-week trip. And it was okay when he was younger, because he couldn't get home. The weekends he'd sit down there and, like he says, sit in the parks and feed pigeons and stuff. It was, not a lot of fun. But later life, he would drive home on Friday night and then drive back down to Scranton or Wilkesboro on Monday morning, because it just couldn't take those long weekends down there by himself. So that didn't work. But he retired as a furniture salesman. He loved his work. And the territory, Mother and I went with him on several trips and stuff like that, and we'd meet people, buyers and that he dealt with, and had the highest regard for Otto. I mean, of course, they're again talking to his wife and kid, but at one time during the war, a couple of the companies that he worked for decided they didn't need salesmen, because salesmen couldn't get out enough, and they would make contacts. And I know this because some of these guys told us the story, that the calls would come to the factory and said, asking you if you want to order something, and their reply would be, well, where's Otto? Well, we have decided that we didn't need him on the road on this particular thing now and all that. And the guy would say, well, forget it. They'd hang up. And so it was pretty quick. And this happened to a lot of salesmen. They got these guys out on the road. So Dad sometimes would travel because of gas station. He'd drive one week, and Elvin Anderson and what they call the old man Anderson would drive, and they'd share the cars. 3 salesmen traveling, so they could make their rounds. So, and then he could make contacts by the phone. They would buy from Dad on the phone because he had a rapport with these guys. He knew them. He'd grown up with them. Yeah. And if anything was ever wrong, Dad was there to correct it, and they knew it. So he was successful. I mean, he being a
how did you gauge
non-educated guy, because he only had 8 grades of school.
Yeah. How did you gauge success in your time period? You're growing up during the
money.
Depression.
I mean, that was it. If you in his day, if you had an income of 5 figures, you were doing real well. He had 5-figure income, but then he had expenses. So I mean, it really wasn't as great as if he had a 5-figure income out of a factory, like a superintendent or something like that. That might even been better, but it was much better than working at anything in a factory. Right. And he was his own boss. And they tried, again, I don't know if it was the war years or what, but I remember when it happened, they wanted him to put him on a salary and forget this commission business. And he wouldn't work that way. He said, no, I want to, and he was better off because he could sell, and he knew it, and he didn't want to be strapped. And one company did have him on a salary or some kind of an arrangement like that, which they did with all their salesmen, I guess. But by and large, he was a commission salesman.
Did within his family group, the Peterson kids, his fellow siblings, was he deemed the most successful?
I'd say so, yeah. And he was the 8th kid, and that's how he got the name, and that's how Otto, he was the 8th child born. And not that means anything, but he was probably the tallest. In those days, Otto was 5'10", and that was Ulrich and Emil and all those guys were. Ulrich was probably about 5'6", 5'5". Emil was. They're all. Oscar was probably pretty close to as big as Dad, but all of them were just a little bit shorter than Dad. Not that made any real difference, but he was when they took pictures and stuff. He was the tallest one in the family, and that wasn't really big.
Did he?
He was.
What?
Well, he wasn't. Another thing about Dad was. He wasn't a party animal by any means, but growing up in Ludlow, his sisters have told me that if there was a party in Ludlow, Otto was invited to it because he's a good time guy, loved to dance, and these Polish weddings which lasted weekends, and Otto would disappear on Saturday to the weddings, and they wouldn't see him back until he went to work on Monday. I mean, he just had a good time. In fact, when Mother and him were married, they'd go out in restaurants or what have you, and Dad and Aunt Rose would dance. Mother wasn't a dancer, and Lil Coffin, and they just loved to dance with Otto because he was a big guy, heavy, but he was very graceful. So he had some attributes about him that didn't fall to me. I know that.
Was he stocky?
Yeah, he was very heavy. Yeah, he probably weighed at 5'10", and his most weight maybe 240, 245. Mm-hmm. And the doctor scared him into losing weight, and maybe in his declining years he lost 30, 40 pounds of that, probably. He was a 200-pounder. There's no question about that.
Smoked?
Smoked, very heavily. Yeah, he could get up in the middle of the night and go to John and smoke a cigarette, and I could never. Even when I smoked, I could never figure out how he could do that.
Yeah.
I mean, that was probably the only real bad habit that he had. He didn't mind if he had a drink or something like that, but
Sure.
he was never anyone to do much of that. Never abused his body in any way like that. And
how do you meet
my
your
mother
mother?
was, huh?
How do you meet your mother?
Her girlfriend Nanny Sorensen, who was married then at the time, she said that there's a guy that's staying with Emil Peterson, who was Dad's brother, up the street, about the Sweet Hill. And she said, if I wasn't married Dad, she says, I'd go after this guy, because he is neat. She'd met him in a store and that. And so, some kind of a way that they made an introduction. Nanny did to Otto, and the rest was history, I guess,
So they met in Jamestown.
They met in Jamestown. And these are the 2 girls. Nanny and my mother worked at the National Worsted Mills together, mm-hmm. and they had a boss they didn't like. Mm-hmm. And one night, that's the guy they called on the phone, got him on the phone, Saturday night, I guess it was, and they told him, hang crepe paper on your nose because your brain is dead, and then hung up. Of course, you never knew who said that to him, but that was just a little bit of fun with their bad boss.
Why did your mother come to Jamestown?
Well, Brookston, you know, the tannery was everything down in Pennsylvania and those little towns, Ludlow and Brookston, the tanneries were dying. And for girls, there wasn't much of an opportunity down there, and they didn't get any education or anything like that. And again, mother came from a big family, so schooling was out. And when they finished their school, they became domestics. And Jamestown, you know, was the bigger city, and offered them a chance to get into domestic work, and that's what she came here to be a maid, and she was.
Do you remember who she worked for?
Huh?
Do you remember who she worked for?
Well, no, not as a young girl, I don't. But I know later in life, she worked at a national worsted mill, like I told you, with nanny in it, and that was, of course, a much better job than being a domestic because you had more free time. But no, I don't know. But in later life, the Depression, she worked for May Briggs, and I can remember that because then that's when I stayed with my grandmother, because Dad was on the road and Mother was a domestic and had to stay overnight with May Briggs, and so I lived with my grandmother. And that didn't go on a long time, but that's the way it was. And then, I don't know how it worked. 2-3 nights she had to do that. I think May Briggs had a couple of maids. And then when Mother got her 3 days in, or whatever it was, come and get me, and I'd go home, and we'd be, her and I, and then Dad would come home usually well, he always would come home on the weekends. But we did, the next week would be the same thing. I stayed on my grandma's house, and you know, they had to get by.
Sure.
Dad would borrow money from his father-in-law to go on the road, more in the weeks than not, and then come back and pick up his check at the furniture factories and pay my grandpa back, and then sometimes pay him on Friday and borrow more money on Sunday so he could get going. I mean, that happened. It was, you know, it wasn't easy times for anybody.
That was Fred?
Fred, yeah, that's Mother's father, and it worked. And of course, Dad made out well. He did better than most of them, and he was the guy lending money to everybody else in the family. Then, as he progressed, there were debts I think he never did collect money from because he. It was my mother's side of the family, and he just let it go at that. But he helped them out.
So, your mother came to Jamestown much earlier than your dad did.
I would think so. I don't know what the dates were, but I would think so. Yeah.
And
they were about the same age. Well, Mother was about 2 years younger than Otto. So, yeah, and being him that he had been in the service and had been out there at Washington and all that stuff there, I would have to think, yeah, she was here probably. I don't know who she was living with then. There must have been a couple of other girls. One of her girlfriends, Kajava was her name, a Polish girl. That was a real buddy of hers, and I don't know what they roomed together here in Jamestown. But you know, that's just what the kids had to do. They had to leave home, you know. And then once Rach got up here, and she could have lived. Her parents came up here too, because the tannery is dying. So they, Fred and Hannah Carlson, they came up here too. So the whole family eventually ended up here. Nobody was in Brookston except Ruth. She stayed there till really almost her dying days. And that was the oldest sister.
Is the house in Brookston still out there?
I don't think so. They're all hunting camps down there now. And I think the one that Doc and Mildred had, that was Mother's brother, I think that's still there. But I think the one that, geez, I don't know. That's interesting.
Would you know where it was?
Oh, sure. Oh, yes, because it was there through my childhood, yeah. Yeah, because we spent a lot of time in Brookston as well as Ludlow when I growing up. You know, Mother's sister was there, so Gordy and I used to go down there and stay weeks with Ruth. You know, every summer. And
so there was, when you were young, you would go back to Brookston because Ruth was there.
Yeah. And then Ruth, she had sugar diabetes and she had attacks, and I don't know what else was wrong with her. And we'd get these phone calls. We didn't have a phone. But the next door neighbor did Sindels, and they would come over and say, you got a phone call, and Mother would go over there. And it happened so many times that Ruth was having health problems, and my dad would pack us up, and Mother and I would go down to Brookston. And many times the roads weren't even paved. You could get so close to Brookston and run out of pavement. And Bob, who was Ruth's husband, would meet us, standing out there in the mud and the rain and all this stuff, and then carry our baggage, and we'd follow him down to Miami, which was several miles of a dirt road. And to the house, and Mother would play nursemaid, and we did that a lot. I mean, there was times we were down there over a week or more, taking care of Aunt Ruth, because she had 2 kids, Bobby and Ruby, but they were young, you know, and they weren't capable of taking care of her. And Rach, of course, she was a guardian angel in that family always. Everybody ended up at our house from both sides of the family, Petersons as well as Carlsons. That's one thing I got to know my cousins better than anybody, because they did come to my folks' house. They were always an open invitation.
What did Fred do?
Well, he worked in a tannery. He was a millwright in a tannery, and then, of course, in Jamestown here, he worked at Advanced Furniture. And he'd get up in the morning. He had to be in his 70s then, still work, because Social Security wasn't even in effect. And he'd go down there, and he'd get down we started work at 7. He'd get down there at 6, because I worked in that factory. And he would sit there and really fall asleep. And then it was time to start the glue presses and the wheels and all that stuff. And Dick, who was my uncle, he'd come over and load them up, put all the stuff in there, and Fred would just sleep right through. He wouldn't wake him up. And then Dick would go do his bit. And of course, Dick was such a valuable man to Advanced Furniture. They didn't dare or say anything to him. That was a thing that Dick could get away with, because Fred would sleep and Dick would do 2 men's job. But when he did Grandpa's, he wasn't doing his job, you understand. But and Dick was good. He matched veneers. In fact, what he did one time, he matched a bedstead of a wolf's face of veneer. And they had that at the furniture market they wouldn't sell it for years. I mean, it was a showcase, and Dick had put that together. You matched the veneers for the finish, and he got this beautiful wolf's head. It was clever. So he was very talented, Dick, in his trade.
Now, Hannah, did she work at all? Do you remember?
My grandmother?
Yeah.
No, not that I didn't. Oh no, I know she. No, they were home. They had a lot of kids, and the responsibility. And then Dick stayed single, and he roomed there. Rose was single, and she roomed there. And it was the family was always under tow. The story was with Grandma Krause one time. Money was a real thing, and Dick had given her $1 for I don't know what. And she sat there. We were sitting in a great big kitchen they had in a factory. And I happened to be there that day, and she sat there rolling this money in her hand, nervous, and sat there rolling. Everybody talked, and pretty quick she went over to the stove and lifted the lid off the stove and threw it in, not forgetting it was a $1 bill. And talk about panic. She cried, and $1. And I'll never forget, because when Dick came home from work, they told the story, and he gave her, of course, another $1, and that eased that. But she forgot what she was winding in her finger and threw in the fire. That's tragic. Real tragic.
How many children then? Your mother's side, how many children did she have?
They had 8 or 9.
All started with the name
R. And the sister in Sweden of my grandfather, Fred, named the kids. He would write a letter to her that they'd had a baby boy, and she would send back the name.
No kidding.
Yeah. So my grandma Hannah had no choice of what they're going to name those kids.
Never heard that.
And they were all ours. And then the only one that stuck with that was the oldest girl, Ruth. She married Robert, and they had 2 kids, Robert and Ruby. Robert married Rose. Ruby married Raymond. And then Bobby had twins, and they died, and they had ours on them. But then the next kid born, whether they felt that was a bad omen, it was Denny. And that's where the ours stopped there. But Ruby kept it up, because her 2 kids were Ruth Ann and Raymond, and I can't say who they married, but that was 3 generations of ours. Whether they thought that was kind of special, I don't know.
So you're born and you're on Faulkner Street.
Mm-hmm.
How long were you in Faulkner Street?
Just a couple of years, and then we moved up to rented a house on Sturgis Street, 75 Sturgis, and that's where I had my my breadboard factory, my newspaper, my detective agency. Mm-hmm. I had all those things going as a kid, and.
Okay, now you have a breadboard here. I mean, you got one of your.
No, I don't have one of mine.
I don't know.
The only one I know, Aunt Rose had one, and I got lost somehow in the thing. Mother had, everybody in a ration had one, and of course we sold them, at such a good price that when I got all done paying for the wages, I had Delbert Carlson, my one cousin, and Gordy working for me. There's 3 of us, and we had a paint shop, and we had a filing shop, and a saw shop, and Grandpa would buy the lumber at United Lumber. Well, the first batch he gave me, and it was a lot of yellow pine, and we sold them for about $1 a piece, and sold them just like that. Everybody wanted one in the breadboard. And then I told Dad I got to have more lumber. He says, "Well, have you got any money for him to go buy the lumber?" What was that? I forgot about that. I paid wages, I bought paint, and we had no money to buy more lumber. So that was the end of the lumber of the breadboard factory.
You're bankrupt.
But then we had our neighborhood newspaper.
Inventory control.
And I'd give anything to have an edition of that thing. And I'll bet you Marvy Johnson, who was in with me, maybe would have had it. And I tried to find him when we were in Denver here, this last thing, and could not locate the guy. So I have no no recollection of or any copy of that newspaper we printed. But it was a neighborhood thing. We had, Elsie Shaw expecting a baby. Nate Driver, he advertised in it. Briggy's grocery store, we charged him so much. That was kind of fun. A detective agency, that was a fantasy. That was nothing that amounted to anything on that. But
What was your model?
motto?
Model. Who did you
Oh,
model?
model
it
after. Oh, I don't know then. No, way back then. But the gangsters were kind of heroes in those days too. That's a shame of it. I mean, not heroes as such, but you knew them. Bonnie and Clyde, Babyface Nelson, Al Capone. You knew all these guys because it was so much in the press. And of course, I would draw caricatures of these guys, and then wanted, and I had a file, and that sort of stuff. And the dentist I went to then was Dr. Burton. I told him about my detective agency, and he said something about, well, what does your mother think of it? And I said, well, she thinks I'm touched. And then I had Burt Raymond delivered a paper, morning paper.
That's the same Burt Raymond who was.
The redhead, that did our, out here, that's the guy, yeah. And he would tie the morning paper on a rope outside my window, and then when I'd wake up, I'd just pull the paper up. And I've been doing that. My dad came home from being gone for a couple of weeks. He's down to get the paper, and he come into my mother. He says, "Where's the morning paper?" Because you check in Lyle's room, and I was sitting reading the paper. How? And he knew I didn't get up, and it made noise, and then I had to tell him what I had hanging on a rope, pulling it up in the morning. And Hank Campbell, next kid, and I, we had those SOS, things between us. And we never could get that Morse code down right. So we'd stick our heads out the window and holler, I said this, I said that. And we could never read the Morse code, but we tried. It didn't work too good.
This was all on 75 Sturgis, huh?
Yeah, I went to Fox Street School, and 6 grades of that, and, 7, I guess, because kindergarten, and through 6th grade. Then Washington Junior High, and I think about the second year in Washington Junior High, or maybe even the last one, we moved to around the corner, 356 Price Street. They were selling the house we were renting, and Mother was so, the neighborhood meant so much to, and our Peterson, or our Carlson family rather, were all North Siders. It's a funny thing how things happen, just like your mother were, almost, their whole family was on the West Side. And where you seemed to locate, Rose and Rudy and Doc, everybody lived on the North Side. So when the house was sold out from under us, and Dad was going to move us somewhere else, she cried, I cried. I didn't want to leave school, let's not think of going anywhere but staying on that North Side. And Mother especially, because she loved the neighborhood and all her friends and relatives were there. So we bought a house right around the corner, and when we moved, we carried everything. We never even hired a truck, because Whitey and Doc and all of them, would come up and they carried the sofa and carried it right around the corner, and the refrigerator, we wheeled it up on a thing, we never used a truck or anything. Was that close, just to 356 Price Street.
So you stayed, that was your home right through?
That was my home through, till I got married, yeah. And of course, it was 2 years, I think, of high school, and of course I went away, in the Navy and then college and all that stuff, and so I didn't spend as much time in that house as the other ones. Sturgis Street was my real growing up house.
Grandpa and Grandma, or your mom and dad, never took in boarders, did they?
No, we never had, no. But, no. Emil and them took in baseball players every year, but no, we never did, no. In fact, Sturgis Street was 2 bedrooms, mine and theirs, and that's in Sturgis Street, of course, Price Street had 3 bedrooms, but Mother used one in the wintertime as a laundry, if it was warmer, sitting up there, so they never really had room to think of it. Well, I gotta take that back, because my grandfather Fred, when my grandma died, and he finally sold his house on Faulkner Street, then he rotated around the whole family. In other words, he spent, I can't tell you, 3 or 4 months with us, 3 or 4 months with Doc and Mildred, 3 or 4 months with Aunt Rose, and I don't know that he stayed with Rudy or not, but there was 3. So he would move, and so that little green room, if you remember it, that was always Grandpa's room. So later in life, yeah, he did. And he was at our house every day anyway, because of again, that charisma with Rach, that was Raquel, he called her. That was probably his favorite daughter, and he would come to our house every day, no matter where he lived. He would be at our house for coffee and bulla, and all that stuff here. So we seen Grandpa every day, and he was a fun guy. And him and he put hardwood floors in that whole house on Price Street. And I worked with him, and boy, I'd get up the next day, and I was stiff and sore, and he had to be close to 70, if not 70, and he rebounded and was back up there, boy, wanted to know for me to get the wood and let's go. He was a tough old boy.
You lived through the Depression. What were your impressions of that? Did it affect you
you know,
much, given the fact that your dad was?
I told you, he borrowed money and all that. I knew that, to go on the road, and the fact mother worked, that I lived with my grandparents. That was all part of the Depression, and it was tough times for everybody. But we didn't know we were poor. Nobody knew because everybody's in the same boat. We lived in a very middle class neighborhood, and we're all same things. Nobody was on welfare or anything like that. You got by, but you could. Anderson's Groceries would Donna had charge accounts for you, and paid at the end of the month and stuff like that. And credit was established everywhere when you paid your bills, and that's, of course, they had the best credit because they did pay the bills. So they had no real problems with that. And you didn't have, ice boxes, not refrigerators. So you shopped literally every day, when you went and got meat and all that stuff. One of the vivid things about the Depression I remember is Dad went down to Grizzle, had the meat market then. I can't think of his first name. And Dad came home with Hamburg wrapped in just a piece of cellophane, plastic. And Mother says, "What in the world?" Carrying his hand. He says the constable or what have you had come and taken his paper away because he couldn't pay his bills. So he didn't have no paper to put the meat in. So when you got the meat, you got it literally in your bare hands to take it home. Because the poor guy wasn't able to pay his bills. That was our meat man.
Did anybody in the family, either on your mother's side or your dad's side, have to go through during the Depression, lost their house or anything like that?
No, Mother had a lot of that in her family. Eric and all of them, they did. They lost homes and stuff like that, but nobody did. No, they were hard. I mean, they were. I would say that don't mean they weren't hard workers. These were hard, but these guys had better jobs. Like Doc was a millwright, and a maintenance man, and Dick. I told you what his talent was. And Rudy was at Art Metal. He was a kind of assistant foreman and stuff. These guys had jobs that, that didn't get hit by that. They'd cut their wages and all these things, but you did get by. There was nothing for a guy to find out that he'd lost 10 cents an hour and stuff like this back in those days, and that they had to do it. But they all worked. I don't remember any of them not working. And Rose, she was a talented gal in the office. She always worked. And of course, that's what helped my grandma and grandpa Carlson because they were home playing board. Rose and then Rang, she was a domestic all her life. M.R. Stevenson, the old lawyer, and she lived in. So I mean, she had her life there. She got, I think it was $6 a week. That was her wages. And when I started, I got an L's at 7 after school, and she told that to Mrs. Stevenson, and Mrs. Stevenson gave her a raise. And then I got another raise, and the same thing happened to Rang. After the third raise, they no longer even believed in Rang giving her. She wouldn't give her the third raise, but I got the third raise down again. I got up to $9 or $10 a week, and she was telling the Stevensons about and here I was just doing it after school, and she was living here, all around. But she had her board, of course, too.
Your dad comes from a family of about
11.
11 kids?
I think about 11, yeah.
Your mother comes from a family of
8 or 9, yeah. There's some kids in there they lost, and we somewhere have names of a couple of kids, I think, at Dad's family. I think they raised, Otto being the 8th, and then, of course, there's Don and Hannah after him. So they probably raised 10 or 11 kids, yeah. And my grandfather would buy everything in lots of a dozen. You go down, and Grandpa Gust was, John Barleycorn was his undoing, he was a tough guy. I remember, boy, he was as hard as nails, that whole guy. And he was a teamster, and a teamster today then is like what your crane operators would be, in other words, these guys were paid more money because it was a talent that a lot of people didn't have to be able to handle horses. And the tannery had furnished the horses, and you had a guy to drive them, and that's what, of course, Gus did. And he made more money than anybody else. I mean, the teamsters were the highest paid people. And then when he went down into Ludlow and that, or Triumph, to Duke, he had his own teams. And that's where we, according to Art, told a story about that. The Standard Oil was into Titusville, and that's where oil was founded. And they came and were hunting for, real badly, for teamsters with horses that would clear roads and so forth to get back to the wells. And these guys that did it got in on the ground floor with stock option, not stock options they'd call them, but they got stock. And Gus was interviewed for it and had the job, and got himself messed up and didn't get down into Titusville from his farm,
Yeah.
and didn't get the job. And of course, Art always says that, you know, had he done this, we could have all had a chunk of Standard Oil and we'd been very rich. But I don't know whether that would ever happen or not. But he screwed that up. And his second marriage was to a woman that was very, very religious. Ma Mary, we called her. And I don't know that Gus really changed his lifestyle too much, but because he used to take me down, I'd ride in that wagon of his down into Ute, and he would put me on a horse while the horse was being shoed. I think I've told you these stories. And he'd buy me, and I would sit on the horse while I shoot him. That was it, yeah. And then when he'd come back, he'd have a bag of candy for me, and it was all I needed. I mean, I'd been sitting on a horse for an hour, and I got a bag of candy, and he'd been off in a mill, you know, having a drink. And then we would go back up that Babylon Hill, which is a tremendously steep, long hill, and he'd fall asleep. Absolutely. If my mother, you know, had ever seen us on that road coming up Babylon Hill with cliffs on the side, him asleep with the reins in his hands, and me as about an 8-year-old kid, you know, chewing on my licorice and stuff like that, she'd have had a fit. But that horse just plodded right up that hill, and by the time we got up on top, which would be, it takes a couple of hours to get up on top, and he was, you know, he was refreshed. Yeah. So they didn't know any different, that he'd been having a few pops.
But he was born in the United States, right?
Oh, no.
No, he came over?
You're talking about Gus?
Yep.
Oh, yeah, sure. He came over, you know. He was born in Kalmar.
Kalmar?
Yeah. And,
what brought him over here? Did he ever talk about that?
I don't know. A lot of them, like, you know, like Dad's or mother's relation, we found out they came, a lot of them, to beat the army over there. I don't know about him. I don't know if he did that or just how it arranged to come. Probably did. You know, they drafted all the Swedes, had to put in army service, and those that didn't like it. But again, I don't want to say he did that, because that's neither good or bad. But economic times in Sweden were terrible. I mean, they encouraged their kids to leave because they couldn't feed them. So, you know.
Did it come over? The whole family come over, or just Gus come over? Do you know?
No, Gus, and he had a brother, Charlie, and I think a sister that was over here. He might have been the first. I think he was the oldest. But there were several of them that were here in America. In fact, they settled down near there. Charlie was, he didn't have the name Peterson, because our names was not Peterson. It was Nicholson, Nicholson. And his father was Petter Nicholson. And he changed his name to Peterson, because he was the son of Peter. Mm-hmm. And that's how that happened. But our names really should be Nicholson. But that didn't happen. Some of the kids would like to be Nicholson, because it's a little different than a common Peterson. Yeah. But it didn't work out that way.
So where did he settle when he came here? Where did they settle when he came here?
I have no idea. About that. See, the Swedes, Ludlow was a big Swedish settlement, you know, and he could have had relatives there and could have come in. This whole area was Swedish, because it's so much like Sweden, with the pine trees and the forests and all this stuff. It's a very big reminder, and their trades. And I don't know what trade he came over here with, because I think he was just a young kid. I don't think he learned how to handle horses and that here. And he did know how to handle horses. You know, well, if a horse would act up, he'd jump off that rig and he'd go out and he'd grab him by the haulers and shake him, you know, and swear at him in Swedish, because I didn't know what he was saying. And I'm sitting again up on that rig, you know, and he's shaking his big 2,000-pound horse, you know, and I don't know what was going to happen. And then he'd get back up on her, and boy, that horse didn't monkey up anymore. And this would be plowing time or whatever we were doing, you know. I spent an awful lot of time with him, and because I loved horses. I was never scared of anything. I think a lot of the kids in the family, you know, they didn't take to that stuff, but I did. And he liked me, and he used to call me a smart little coon, meaning raccoon. And because raccoons were considered to be smart little animals. He'd tell my mother, he says, that one, he's a smart little coon. Because I liked his horses.
Now, we know he was a teamster. Was he a farmer?
Well, he wasn't much of a successful farmer. He had that farm in Ute, and it was about the size of our camp, about 25 to 30 acres. And he had a garden, I can remember that, and he had his horses, and he had 4 or 5 cows, and pig, you know, and stuff. And it was to eat and then trade. He traded eggs and stuff like that. And then he also worked, because he right to almost his dying day, drove that team on the county roads, you know, and lugging like gravel and all that stuff and helping to build the roads up through Tidiute. He did that in the summer times. So to get by, you know, because the farm, I think that gave them food. You know, they canned everything. They nothing went to waste. You know, and even you'd slaughter an animal, you'd use the blood. They made blood pudding, and they ate blood pudding and you know, everything. You just didn't waste anything. That's how pig's feet and all this stuff here. You know, it's pickled stuff and my dad, that was one of his favorite foods. And you can still buy them in the stores, pickled pig's feet. And I've eaten them. Try them sometime.
Glad to. Now, your dad grew up principally in Ludlow, right?
Yeah. He wasn't in Tidiute, no. They started in Ludlow and went to Tidiute. And when that farm got finally sold, he got old, he couldn't operate, and back to Ludlow. So that was a story of the family. And
where in Ludlow? When you went back the last
You know
time.
where we went back. Yeah, you know where that place is, up across the railroad tracks.
Okay, Don's place.
Don's, yeah. Well, that was Grandpa. That's where Grandpa lived.
Oh, okay.
And then Don took it over when when Mom Mary, Grandpa Peterson died first, and it was Mom Mary that died after that. She lived there until she died.
What were the circumstances around the death of the first wife?
Yeah, that was sad. It was, I think, in a burst of appendicitis. She was sick, and they were taking her to Buffalo. And imagine she had 10 or 11 kids and died on her way to Buffalo to be operated on. And of course, those things would never happen today, you know.
Yeah.
Because, you know, Colonel Kane up there in Kane, Pennsylvania, he was a doctor at that time in Kane, but not maybe then. He took his own appendix out, you know, I mean, and did his own operating. Yeah. Oh, yeah, it's quite a story. They've got it, you know, imprint on the building up there, Kane Manor. How Colonel Kane, he was a doctor, and he took a knife and cut himself open and removed his appendix, and pretty tough.
So then Gust was left with 11 kids.
Yep. And they married Mom Mary, who had 2 or 3 kids.
Shortly thereafter? Or?
They were, well, I don't know about that, but they were all grown. I mean, Dad was, all of them were out of the home when that happened. I think the only one home possibly would have been Don. And he wasn't because he was young, he just was a bachelor, you know, he never did get married. And he came back, he worked for the railroad, he got a pension on the railroad, he worked for the railroad and got hurt. And so he had to quit, and then he came back and worked the farm for Grandpa, they lived there, and that was, it was only Don, yeah, because Hannah and all of them had left. Hannah had married late in life, or Jenny rather. And she's the one, of course, that had married into the money and had the money, you know, that we all benefited from, really.
Right.
And if she'd been alive today, she'd be, you know, it'd be something fabulous what she'd be worth. But she's a guy got her husband. He'd been married, and he hadn't even paid for his wife's funeral, and it had been years. Chester Dickout. And Jenny got him all financially secured and paid off all his bills, and he had a print shop like Rodman's here in town. Right. And Jenny went in and helped him run that. So he really did. He credited Jenny for, you know, as much as anything of his successes. So when he died, he wasn't really wealthy, but he had all these securities and stocks that they'd invested in from tips from his daughter's husband, who was married into the Couchois family that owned Commercial Stamping and Shearing. And they let Dickout get in on the ground floor, and the rest was history. The point of the monies that they ended up having, you know, that company's now been sold to Parker Heflin, but in Cleveland, big deal. Why
don't you go down that? Look at the side tabs there, you know, and there seems to be names of all of, you know, from your dad, and maybe you can talk a little bit about your dad's brothers and sisters. Maybe just the names can give you some.
Well, like I said, it starts off with the oldest was Oscar, and he went to state of Washington, and I never met Oscar. That was Bob's dad. But then around here was the next in age would have been Emil, who had red hair, really? Where your daughter gets her hair from, bright red, and he called him Red, of course. And he was the barber. And then David was a guy that stayed in Ludlow for a long time, worked in the tannery till its demise, and he's a guy that saved That guy, I imagine he's probably dead now, but I know I've met him down there. Had both hands cut off, had claws. And David was the guy that everybody stood there and watched this thing get into. He got caught in a machine, and David's the guy that jumped over and hit the power switch. Otherwise, he'd been torn to pieces. But he did lose two hands. But so then David, the dad got David a job at Mar-a-Lago, and they moved to Jamestown. So in fact, he died at right in the plant at Mar-a-Lago. And Eric, he was the littlest guy, and he was the baseball man, good ball player, and they claimed he could have done something with baseball. He was that good. All of them played ball, but Eric was really good. David managed the team, and if you made a mistake with David, you could expect you probably when you come into the bench or even on the field get a kick in the pants. Mm-hmm. He made stories about Dave, but Eric was a ball player, and then Otto, of course, and then Don was the youngest, and then he had sisters. Aunt Julia and Aunt Jen and Hannah and Marie. Mm-hmm. And I think I made a mistake. I think Marie was the oldest in the family, then Oscar, and then Emil. And that team of horses that you see right here, the red and white and black horses, he bought them down in Warren, Pennsylvania, at an auction of the circus, and I almost think it was Cole Brothers. They were their teams. They were selling some of their teams, and he bought them. They were circus horses, and that was a great day. That's a picture of them right there.
You have names for them? Do you remember the names of the horses?
Well, I remember one set was Pat and Mike. Yeah, and I don't know if that was a set, but I remember one. Yeah, one of them was Pat and Mike, and Hannah became a nurse in the Red Cross. Well,
during World War I, how many of that group was in the World War I?
Eric, and he was stateside. Oscar went in to find Otto when he was missing in action. You know, that was quite a story there. That he worked for DuPont, and DuPont would not let him go into service. And when Otto came up missing in action, he went to the superiors at DuPont and said, "I am going into service." And he talked to the Army. They would let him go to Europe to find his brother who was lost. And as the story goes, he did get in the Army, but they didn't get him across the pond. Of course, Otto was found, and so forth and so on. And he's very bitter about that because they did not. Don was too young for the thing. But Jenny was a nurse, but she wasn't in the Army. But Hannah was in the service. Mm-hmm. So there was about four of them. But the only one that saw any action was Otto. Yeah. He was a machine gunner. You know all that stuff. And
would you talk about that?
No, you couldn't get him to talk much about it. And I was telling Amy last night, you found out in later life of guys that did something in the service or saw something, they didn't much want to talk about it. Bad stuff. A guy that talked a lot about his service usually, he didn't do a great deal or see a lot. But I can remember one thing. We went in Washington, Pennsylvania. Mother and I were traveling with him, and we went to the movie All Quiet on the Western Front. And I told Amy last night too that the Petersons were not emotional people. In fact, when Grandpa Peterson died, their father and Mother came. I didn't go to the funeral. I was too small, I guess, or I don't know. I was in school, but I didn't go to the funeral. But Mother came home, Rachel, and she said, "I have never seen such a bunch." She was very disturbed. There wasn't one tear shed at Grandpa Gus's funeral. And it didn't mean he didn't feel bad, but of course he'd been a little bit of a rascal too. I mean, it was, he had not been the best type father and all that stuff, but that's the way they were. They did not show emotions, and so that's just the way they were. And what else was I telling Amy? I forget now.
Well, you told about the movie.
Oh yeah, the movie. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, well, yeah. So we came out of that movie, All Quiet on the Western Front. We were in the lobby, and my mother, nudged me. She says, "Look at your father," she says, and he had tears in his eyes. And she says, "You'll never see that again." And I never did until she died. But that movie got to him because, of course, it's all on Germans and the kids, and he knew he'd killed a lot of Germans. I mean, you couldn't be a machine gunner or part of that thing unless you killed people, and killed probably a lot of them. In fact, of his three-man crew in that machine gunning thing, he was the only one who was come out alive. The other two guys were killed, and he was gassed, but he lived. But the other two
Did he
were killed.
complain about his condition?
I can remember him having some episodes when I was a young kid. Yeah.
What were they?
Well, he'd pass out from, and the mother would get him to the doctor and all that stuff, and they said it was his lungs. And
Must have
food.
scared you.
Oh, sure, because remember, we passed out one time down at Red and White grocery store. We're getting groceries, the three of us. And he did, and it was nothing more than that. And we got the doctor, it was his lungs. Then he continued to smoke. He wouldn't give it up. Mother, she hid cigarettes, she did everything to make him quit, and he did quit for a while, and he was so depressed that she went and got the cigarettes. She said, I can't take this. She says, he was just a different guy.
Did he have a hobby? Grandpa have a hobby?
If it was going to be a hobby, it'd be baseball. As a
Just watching.
spectator, he loved baseball. He couldn't go to Pittsburgh without going to Forbes Field. And you know what it was like down here at the stadium. His big love was going down the ballpark. And they were all sports. They were all sports. I mean, you'd listen on the radio, the bowl games, the football games, that was a big event on New Year's Day. We'd sit alongside the radio and the fights. Both sides of the family were very sports-minded. I mean, there were big deals in our family. Grandma would have us all down the house, on the radio, to listen to Joe Louis fights. And even prior to him, the fights prior to Joe Louis. But Joe Louis, of course, came on the scene, and that was, I don't know, that was everybody's hero. I mean, he was just I don't know, he's a black man, but he encompassed the whole nation. And he had his tough times with being black, but, by and large, everybody loved Joe Louis. And so, yeah, it was a sports family. And they played ball. Otto and the salesman's picnics and stuff like that, he played softball. And
Was he a golfer? Did he do anything?
No,
Any sort of active sport?
No, he didn't do anything like that. Drive, he loved to drive, that on a weekend. I mean, it was nothing for him to get in his car and drive. He loved to go up to the airport. You can remember that? And sit and watch airplanes come in. Had a real passion for that. And could sit there on the hour just watching airplanes land. He was fascinated with that. So, and the first plane ride he ever took was with me, and he was scared to death. It was when a plane came in and one of them big bombers, and it cost about $2 a ride. And I said, I coerced him into going down there, and he gave me the money to go on it, and I knew he didn't want to go. And I don't know how old I was, probably 10, 11, but I said, you got to go with me, Dad. And he did, but he sat at the end of the seat looking into the alley or the walkway of the plane. He didn't want to look out that window. I was all enthralled with it, but he didn't. But and he rode planes after that. In fact, from Chicago, the market and stuff like that, they flew home a couple of times. And so he got over that, but he loved to watch the planes.
Well, Amy asked me to ask you the question of which I was leading to. We got sidetracked, ending up with Gust and all this other stuff. Is here your mother came from a large family, your father came from a large family, and you're a family of one.
That's right. There's a lot of them that way.
Why is that?
Depression. No question about it. They couldn't raise any more kids. I mean, in that whole neighborhood of ours, I can name you probably 5 families that had one child, and they couldn't afford it anymore. And then you take none of them, like Emil had 2, Flavia and Ann, and Jenny had none. Don had none. Of course, Don never married. Hannah had 2. Marie had a large family. She was the oldest. Oscar had 2. Nobody had, and it was that whole era, huh?
Eric had none.
Eric had none. No, and he got married late in life, of course,
What
too.
about David?
David had none. That's right, and he was married as young. They had no children. I don't know what the story was there, but and with his depression times. And like I said, there was in our neighborhood there had to be 5, 6 families with one, and they were all boys. Willie Stancliffe and Donnie Nagel, all just one kid, Ray Holm, and one boy. So it was not a very unusual thing at that time. And they said I was enough of a handful anyway too. So
Did you miss not having it?
I don't think so, because I had Gordy. We grew up together, and he was like a brother, and we were together literally almost every day as young kids anyway. And he lived at our house. So it wasn't so much I was there; he was at our house. And Mother and Dad included him on everything. And Sunday afternoons, the rides, wherever we went, Gordy was with. So I had, in fact, the guys down on the east side envied us, because Gordy and I would play together in that gang all day long. And they had brothers involved there, the Lundgrens and the Lindstroms and all were had brother. And they'd fight among themselves. And when the day was done, I'd go home and Gordy'd go home. And they said, you guys got the best of worlds, There was no fighting between the two. No jealousies, no sibling rivalry or anything, And I think that was part of it, probably, that I did have Gordy, and it was good. And they had 3 kids, and so missing Gordy wasn't the worst thing in the world for that family. I mean, it helped them out too.
Who were the other 2?
Petrus and Garwood. So,
Gordy's about your age?
yeah. And Lee was the only child, see, and on that side of the family. And Ruth had 2, Ruby and Bob. And
Of course, Rang had none. Rose
Rang had none, Rose had none, Dick had none.
Yeah.
So it was not an unusual thing, in other words, you know, I mean, at that time. And it really was. It was more mainly the Depression that caused that. Big families were not in a vogue, and people were moving into the cities rather than a farm. When you're on a farm, it was a different story. You needed hands to work with, and big families were more of an asset than they were anything else. But when you came to live in a city, it just wasn't that way. And living was not easy, so that's what it was. I mean, you know, like I had to beg. If I had Rose and Rang, Rang bought me my dog. Rose bought me my ice skates. You know, it goes on and on and on. These were my so-called old maid aunts at the time. And, you know, if I hadn't had them, you know, a lot of things I wouldn't have had. But they would shower things on us, but I mean, you know, get a puppy, that was about $6, $7 I had Rang bought, and that'd be a week's pay for her. That's what she did.
A little spoiled.
Yeah, well, yeah, between all the aunts and stuff like that and uncles, you probably were. And yeah, when we would fight down on the farm, Emil and Eric and all that gang would be pulling for me to beat up a whole teen kid, and, you know, my cousins, and it was crazy. Hit him again, you know, stuff like that. And my mother, she gets so mad at that stuff that, oh gosh, and they'd stand and watch us fight, you know. And the Jamestown crowd would, of course, root for me because they hardly knew the whole teen kids. Funny times.
Who was the disciplinarian in your family?
Oh, my mother. Oh, yeah. You know, she used yardsticks and switches and everything she could get her hand on me. But no, my dad, he'd tell her what I'd done, you know. But I don't ever remember getting a licking from him. Maybe get bawled out, but she was. Oh gosh, yes, yeah. She beat me up.
You'll never have that memory, will you?
Your mother wasn't the one, huh? No, my dad, because he wasn't home too, you know. And it would be tough for him to come home and discipline me for something I'd done on Monday, and this is Thursday or Friday, you know. And but they would talk it over, and the trips to the Gary home and all that stuff, that would happen, and you know, they shook me up, but
it really happened, huh?
it really did happen, yeah. Well, yeah, yes, it did. Them are true stories, yeah. One more screw up, and this is where you're going to end up, and we'd ride out there and come on home. So, yeah, they wanted a perfect kid, but they didn't, I guess, think they had one. So that was what happened.
You ever go on vacations?
Oh yeah, we traveled with Dad, and we're down in Pennsylvania. Yeah, we'd go a week, stay in tourist homes, you know, and Mother and I would shop and go to ball games and sit in the car a lot, you know, no question about that. But then we'd go out to the restaurants in the evening and stuff like that. And in the tourist homes, you'd sit and meet the people. They were good experiences, you know. Down in where was it? We're down in Washington, PA, on the river down there. Remember that? And they were hunting for harvesting eels out of the river, and we were sitting there watching that, you know, at night with the family we were staying with, and met a lot of nice people that way. But it was always tourist homes. But when Dad traveled, he always stayed in hotels because tourist homes didn't have the phone facilities and a small desk, and of course he had to write up his orders, et cetera, you know. So he never stayed in tourist homes. They would have been cheaper, but he had to have a hotel room, and they weren't that expensive.
Were there camps? Were there things that kids could go to outside of the household when you were growing up?
Well, there were, but I didn't go much to that stuff. No, neither did Gordy. I mean, we were that whole gang, that East Side gang. We did some of the kids in my neighborhood, like Willie Stankel, they always went to Y Camp. I never went to Y Camp. We did go down to Culletville and camped in that camp down there. About 10 of us guys, and that was not a good experience. We almost starved to death. We were scared at nights, and there was animals all over the place because right out of the woods, and snakes in the river and the creeks, and it was a tough time. We never did it again, but we were down there for about a week, and in fact we were down there when Aunt Ruth died, and I can remember my dad, somebody anyway, coming down and getting Gordy and I to take us out of the camp to the funeral home to see my aunt and then bring us back, you know. So that happened that very week that we were down there, which it helped my mother now because she had to be so active with the funeral night because again she was the head honcho of the family, you know, always was. Ruth was the oldest, but they leaned on Mother more for, you know. Well, Mother had her health then, and Ruth didn't. And Ruth had a tough time, real tough. I don't think you never met Ruth, did you, Butch?
No.
Well, talk about these your dad's brothers and sisters. What happened to them ultimately?
Yeah, they had that. Well, they had a reunion down at Jenny's, and then coming back from that, Carl Holteen was driving, and his wife Julia, which is Dad's sister, was killed, and Don was hurt real bad, and Marie, did something happen? Julia's the only one that died, right? Huh?
Yeah, Julia did.
Yeah, Julia was killed, and but there were some of them banged up pretty bad, and yeah, a woman killed in an auto accident, Newcastle. Julia Holteen, 50, she's 50 years old, and they'd been to Jenny's in Youngstown for a family reunion, and just the brothers and sisters, and had a real good time, and coming home, it was an auto truck crash on Route 18 and 278, 2 miles west of New Wilmington, PA. And she was riding with her husband, suffered fractured ribs and internal injuries. Seriously injured was her husband, Carl Holteen, and Don Peterson, and his sister-in-laws, Mrs. Eric Peterson, who was Nina, and 50 of Ludlow, and relative of the dead woman.
Wow.
Yeah, the Holteens and Petersons had been visiting with relatives in Youngstown, and were en route to Ridgeway and Ludlow. And it was Holteen's fault because he failed to observe a stop sign. Carl. So, yeah, I didn't realize she was only 50 years old when she was killed. Yeah, that put a damper on that whole good time that they had. And this is a picture of the reunion. They were all there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 of them.
And only Oscar probably was missing. Only Oscar was probably missing.
Yeah, because he never came back.
Why was that? Why did he?
It was something, yeah. I don't. Again, Otto was, he knew all this stuff. But anything bad, you didn't get much out of the guy. Anything that was, Otto and Oscar, they were like this. I mean, Dad went out. They went to visit him when I was in the Navy and all that. And that was the one guy. Again, that was a not strange part, but our family was that way. The whole family evolved on both sides at our house, being there, and the kids and everybody came to our home because Otto and Rachel were that kind of people. Mother would make the best dinners and food. They'd come up with their girlfriends from Ludlow, Donnie and them, and come up and have a dinner on a Saturday night. And Mother would make a dinner for the girlfriend and Don, and then they'd go to a movie and go back to Ludlow. Well, what thing better how could you impress anybody any better than that?
Absolutely.
And they did this. I mean, and sometimes I guess you call it taking advantage of a good thing, but they did it, and all the kids. I mean, it always ended up at our house. It was good for me, I guess, and they liked it. But that's just the way it was. It was open house all the time. And Jenny and them, when they'd ever come to town, there was Emil, in town. They wouldn't stay with them. They always stayed at our house, and they'd sleep on a floor and everything. And she had a great big house on Catlin Avenue, but they were at our house. I don't know all that, but that's the way it was. Why? And of course, Otto also traveling the way he did, he would, in his trips, he would buzz over to Youngstown and see Jenny and Hannah on a trip. And he always come through when he came back from Pittsburgh. He'd always come through Ludlow, and he would see Eric and Don and Marie. And this was happening. In other words, he kept in touch with these people probably on a monthly basis almost. So they just knew everything that was going on with Otto, and he enjoyed that. He liked it. And they would fuss over him. And his sisters, in fact, Jenny and Hannah both, Otto was their favorite. There's no question about that. No question about that. They were close in age, and they had a lot of fun together, and their stories really meshed, those two girls and Otto, and they called him Pat, of all things. He was always Pete to everybody, but to those two he was called Pat. Why or what for, I don't know. But that's what they referred to him as a young guy. And they're the ones I always told about his parties and his things like that. But, they locked him in his room one time, and he had to pay to get out because he was going to a party. And until he would slip some money under the door, they wouldn't let him out. Stuff like that. So they were pretty close.
Why'd your dad retire?
Well, I guess he just got tired of the traveling, I mean, you could see it in him, He'd go on these trips, and he'd start, like I said, that 2-week deal. He'd drive all the way home and drive all the way back. and that wasn't easy. And then pretty quick, he almost forgot about Eastern Pennsylvania. And of course, the companies wouldn't like that, but it was just got too much, and he wanted to be home, and he paid into Social Security, and he got his Social Security, and he
Did he
did a
live-
little investing, you know. He'd sit down at a bank with Henning Swanson, and Henning would direct stuff, and just like your kids. That's how he bought all your stuff. He'd go down there and sit with Henning, and they'd pick out some stuff for fun for you. And so he had, a few bucks. He wasn't wealthy by any means, but they lived comfortably. And in fact, they borrowed, the money for this house and all that. And we never did pay them back because they both were dead before I ever paid them back.
Mhm.
But I paid all the other stuff, but I never paid back the money they lent me on the mortgage. That was, and it was $3,000-4,000.
Mhm.
So it's half the purchase price almost of this house.
Right.
Because I had no money. I mean, and Gladys was pregnant again, and all that little story, how that went. How we couldn't get over that. And so we had to have a house, and that's where we got this. And they decided, that's the funny part about it when we think about Allen Park, and we talk so much about Otto and that, and he was, of course, a great guy, but Rachel was the boss in the family. And when we went to look at houses, we probably looked at 10 houses, and she'd find something wrong with every house. And your mother and I would come back into our little room down there in Sturd Street, and Gladys would be upset. And, well, I would be too. I said, what in the world, you can't find anything that pleases her. And we had to please her because we had to get money.
Mhm.
See, so we didn't have much say in this thing. Well, then this house came up in Allen Park, and we came up here and looked at this. And we met afterwards, we get together over mothers or how we did this each time. And she said, I think that's a good house for you. Man, your mother was ecstatic, and because this is the one that she really wanted anyway. And mother said, okay. So they lent us the money, and we bought the house. And we needed it because Gladys was pregnant. And the day we signed the papers up at Kenny Johnson's office, your mother period came around because she was all whacked up because of giving birth to you, and her cycles would be way out of whack. And this time had gone longer, and we just knew she was pregnant, and that's why we had to buy this house. And the Saturday that we did, and we did not have to buy the house, but we had the house, so it worked out. And it was within a few months later she was pregnant with Randy, so it worked out. But that's how we got this house, and it was, like I say, we talk about Allen Park and all these things here, how we got up in here, and that was because we satisfied Rach.
Did your dad enjoy good health in retirement?
Yeah, I think so. He had some, heart problems. I think he ended up with a little mild diabetic. But the doctor, the day he died, he'd been to Goodell, in the morning, and said, "Hey, you're in good shape, Otto." And he died that night.
Mhm.
And he died, I think, because of Grandma's death, And again, we get back to that emotion stuff, He never showed it. He'd come up here right after, he ate with us literally almost every night after Grandma died. And he would worry more about our business and our kids and stuff like that. Never really talked about his own feelings in that, And kept it penned in. And I think that really he could not live without her. I really do. I think a lot of the mother agrees in that it was really a tough time for him. But he didn't show it. But it was a great way he went, Well, you were with me the night we found him.
Mhm.
And that was very upsetting because mother just died 6 months before that. And I'm convinced that's what happened with him.
Mhm.
He just gave up. And so that was a bad year, 1964. In fact, Grandma died on your birthday. Yeah. And he died almost on my birthday in July.
Mhm.
So that was the end of their lives.
I remember you calling every night and being very concerned, and often he would not pick up the phone. I mean, things you remember as a 13-year-old, that you would call checking in, and sometimes it would ring, and then when it wouldn't ring, next thing you know, you'd be going over there or calling somebody to check.
Yeah, that happened. Yeah, that happened before, and that's what we did the night that he died. Yeah, you and I rode over there. Yeah, because he'd been here in the afternoon, and I talked to him every night, make sure that he felt okay, and he wasn't taking any medications that I can remember, anything like that. I wasn't worried, but just to see how he was. And he always had good. He was always a positive guy. You know, you never get anything negative out of him. He was happy with his life. I mean, everything had worked out good for Otto. He was a happy guy, and he made other people feel good. You know, people want to be around him. Kids would come over in our house, you know, and sit on our porch, and not to really see me as much as to sit and listen to Otto. You know, he'd sit in his chair on Sturgis Street, and we never had a lawn in our house. You know, it was always just mud, dirt, that whole front lawn, because all the bikes and everything would just be piled on there. You know, and like I say, they certainly you know, were my gang, but they'd sit there and talk to him, and he'd always have some kind of an apropos story of something, you know, and talk it over with the kids, and they loved him. They all did.
Is he a funny guy?
Well, yeah, he could, you know, well, the Petersons could tell stories. Oh my gosh, you know, if he could only have written those down, we'd have a fortune, because they were stories. I mean, and they could tell them. And but you know, you can't, just like people can't say, tell me a funny story. You know, like, you can't do that. They'd have to be in the mood, and Donnie Swanson would be a good one to tell you about that, because they had an occasion down in Ludlow, and we sat out on the porch, and with Eric and Don, David, Otto, Amo, they're all there, and they sat on them swings on a porch, and somebody set them off the story. So, just one right after another, and Donnie and I, we sat there, and honest to God, we just couldn't believe our ears. And if we could only have tape recorded that stuff, you know, and characters that came out of Ludlow, and things that they'd run onto, and just one right after another. And Otto was probably as good a storyteller as any of them. Eric and him didn't tell many stories. They remembered things, and they'd say, "Now, Otto, do you remember this?" You know, and stuff like that, and get him going. Yeah. And David too he had stories. You know, times are different then, because everybody, their lives were based on family and homes. You know, no TV and no running off anywhere. Ludlow now, Rach would say that was a sinful city, because they had a bar. Brookston, she always claimed that was a piece of heaven, because there's no bars in Brookston. But Ludlow was wild. That's where her husband came from.
We have that on tape.
Yeah, you do, sure, that's true.
We have that on tape.
Yeah, there's a bit of heaven in Brookston.
No, I don't remember Grandma. Was she ill, Rachel?
Yes, she had a lot of problems. She had angina. And yeah, you never knew when one of these attacks was going to hit. She'd take care of you kids sometimes, and wasn't really feeling good, and would be sick on a weekend and stuff like that. But she would still do it. But Weddingfeld was her doctor, and he was over there many times in the middle of the night, and jumping over. And I'd be over there. Dad would call me, and I'd get over there, and he said Weddingfeld's on his way, and he would, you know, and she'd had another attack, and he medicated her. He was good to her, really. Kept her maybe alive. You know, in today's way, both of them maybe would have had bypass surgeries, right, because they were heart conditions, and but mother's was a little bit, and high blood pressure. They were out in Denver, and her blood pressure was up to around 300, just ready to blow, and they had to stay over in Denver. They were on their way out to the coast to see me, and then went up to see Oscar. She had, in fact, high blood pressure was in their family. Now Otto had low blood pressure. And thank goodness, I take after that, because I've never had a blood pressure problem. But Bobby's, you know, cousin Bobby and all them, Ruth, all of them had high blood pressure problems. Rudy, that was her. And Rudy, of course, had diabetes. There are a lot of diabetics. So we have to be careful in our family, because it's on Grandma's side too. You know, Harold had his leg cut off because of diabetes. You know, so it's in both sides.
Was she at the end? Was she? I know she was in the hospital when she died, but was she?
She'd only been in the hospital a few days.
Yeah.
Yeah, it wasn't any length of time at all. No. And that was I was bowling. I came home here, and Otto's car was out front, and I come running in, and I said something was wrong, you know. And then he told me that he'd taken Mother to the hospital and all that. And we went over there that night, and the next day, and I was thinking about the next day she died. Mm-hmm. Her kidneys shut down, and that's something you can't live with, you know. I mean, that's and Weddingfeld was right with her, gave her a shot. We remember that, 'cause Mother was talking about the other day, and no more giving her a shot of whatever he did, and she died. Mm-hmm. But it wasn't a shot to put her out of the misery or anything like we're talking about. It was supposed to hopefully get her kidney going, but it didn't. The uric acid or whatever you want to call it was too much. So that was a very sad time, because it was the end of the family then, you know, because when she died, Dad was never quite the same. Mm-hmm. Although I guess you didn't know much about it, but he wasn't. So 1964, both of them went that same year.
You bought a camp.
We bought a camp the next year, I think. Yeah.
Mhm.
And we started going out Sundays, remember, for lunch and all this stuff here, because we just wanted to do some things with Dad's money and stuff like that he wanted to pass around. So yeah, we started other things to kind of take the herd out for a while. And Gladys' folks had died not too long before that.
Mhm.
In fact, I went over and found her mother, and or was it her dad? I think somebody had been his mother. I think it was his dad. And I knew right away that he had gone. And mother didn't want to go over there when they called, or somehow I don't know how. I can't remember it all, but they both died within not too long a time too. And she was, of course, that was a case too where she was taking care of him, and he wore her right out. 'Cause he was sick for years, ever since since Stanley died. He started having problems, and it was never right after that. So we lost both families pretty young. Although they were in their 70s. Otto and Rich were in their 60s.
Was that about the normal age at that time? Was that life expectancy?
Yeah, probably, but then you had more that went to be, 96, 98? So you just don't know. Seemed again, men died a lot sooner than women, had more ailments, more things. And it was a different era, women were childbearing, having kids, and they did their things at home. Not too many of them women worked. But they had other grief, but maybe it wasn't as bad as running businesses and stuff like that the men had to do. Because I'm sure, there was a lot of hours spent, a lot of traveling time with Otto and with CS. It was different. But it was a good life. It was best of times good, like in Tale of Two Cities. Best and worst of times, both ways, because you had that crazy war came on to us too, after the Depression. And that everybody worked, but everybody had a common cause, so the families were entirely different. And they didn't have TV, didn't have mobility. You were homebound, and that really, I think, you can't live in the past, like they say, but you can visit it, but you can't live in it. You've heard that story. That's right, exactly. Yeah, you can't. I mean, it's dangerous, but you'd reminisce about it.
Was your mom and dad upset when you went off to when you enlisted into the service?
Oh, well, I tried to quit school, my junior year. I told that story. I wanted to go, I wanted to get a uniform, I wanted to go. That was in 44, the height of the thing. And I brought papers home for my dad to sign, but he wouldn't sign them. He said, no, you're going to finish school, which was wise, and so, of course, I couldn't. But then we did enlist, and then he said that was okay, because we enlisted before I wanted to get in the Navy, and, of course, if you got drafted, you didn't know where you're going to be. And so that we enlisted, and like I say, I was talking to Don Hodges down the street the other day. We went up to Buffalo. Oh, geez, about a half of our male class of 1945 and enlisted. And this would have been probably April, May of 45. And then we were put in the Navy prior to our 18th birthday, and then called later. Don Hodges, he was called the next day. On graduation day, he left. And I wasn't called until 3 months after that. But that's the way it was. But if you wanted a choice, you wanted to enlist, and we wanted Navy. I mean, that was the attraction then, rather than the Army. And Dad agreed, because he says, you'll have a clean bed and food and all that stuff in the Army, laying in those foxholes and stuff like that. He says that's not the life you want. You want, the Navy's a better place to go. So he recommended that. And so when I enlisted, that wasn't a problem. The war was at its height then. But by the time we got to going, it wasn't. And so there was, Mother, I'm sure. She didn't go to the bus station with me. Grandpa Carlson, Fred Carlson, and my dad went to the bus station when I left. And he'd always said that when the war started, Lee was taken first. And he says, it's a good thing the boys, and that's who we referred to Gordy and I, we were not going to be in the war, Well, as it turned out, Gordy, of course, he was older, a year older, and he got, he stayed main side here. He never went anywhere, but he got in, and of course I got in. I mean, if you hadn't, we'd been all drafted into it anyway. But the war part was over with and done, and my service time was, I don't know, the chicken stuff of the service was the thing about it probably, but it wasn't a bad time. I mean, I enjoyed the year I was in the Navy. That was not a problem. I mean, we got ourselves we were in good shape coming out of high school. You could do everything and everything that they required. So it was kind of a fun time. Navy was okay with me.
Was your mother an emotional person?
Yeah. She's a lot like your mother. Yeah, they like Freckles when he died. Miller's dog. Well, her and Mildred, they cried for 2 days over that dog, you know, and stuff like that. So yeah, it was very, very much so. And when Curly, remember that story? Oh yeah, very upset. Yeah.
No, I don't remember. Tell me.
Curly? Well, you know, I'd call over there on Saturday mornings because of the biscuit deal, you know.
Right.
And every week she'd say, "No, I've got him." But she says, "This is the last Saturday we're making biscuits because it's just too much work. Your father, his arthritic hands and making, you know." And we went through that for a couple of years. But anyway, so I called from the shop because I worked till noon, and I called over there, and she got on the phone and she was crying. I says, "What in the world has happened? What's wrong?" Oh, she says, "Your father's taken Curly and done away with him." Well, I knew that the dog had problems, and she'd been telling Dad, "We've got to do something to get, you know," because he couldn't control himself and all this. And she just bawled on the phone, you know. And I said, "Okay." So I hung up. Well, foolishly, I called up the Koenig Dog Cat Hospital, and I got a hold of the doctor there that we knew because we had the dog for shots. And I said, "Have you done away with that Cocker Spaniel Peterson's?" And he says, "No, not yet." I said, "Don't." "Really?" I went up there and I got the dog and brought him home and brought him in the kitchen, you know, to Mother. And of course, she still was crying from the death, you know, and here the dog is. And overjoyed with the dog, but what a dumb thing this was, because it wasn't 2 weeks later we had to take the dog and do away with him, you know. And so then all over again. I should have never done what I did. It was a big mistake. But Dad, he didn't say anything to her, you know. He just walked out of the house because she'd been telling him, "We got to get rid of the dog." So he, Curly, and put him in the car and took him over there. Didn't say anything. And he come back and she said, "Where you been?" She said, "Well, I was over at Koenig and got rid of the dog." You know, just knocked her down, see. So he didn't use good tact. And then what I did was all wrong. I should have never brought the dog home because it was, yeah. But he was a wonder dog, you know, Curly. So it was, and I felt bad about it too, of course. But it was, and he didn't like you kids, you know. Because he was an old dog, and the kids, when they come over to Mother, he would hide under the stove because they would tease him and pinch him, you know. And he was old and he didn't want to play, you know. He was through his playing years, but he had sense enough to keep away from the kids. And so he was a good dog, but he got old and they had to do away with him.
I don't remember Curly at all.
You don't remember Curly? Well, you couldn't have been very old. No.
You know, movies, certainly.
Yeah. Well, see, again, he was not part of your life because you didn't play with him or anything like that. You tormented him when you were around him, and he just got away from you. So he wouldn't be much of a pet. He was a good dog though. And that's one that Rang bought for me down in Lottsville, $6.
Well, Curly had to be how old when he died?
10, 12, 15 maybe even. Well, yeah, he was up there. Beyond his real life, you know. 'Cause they took such good care of him, you know. And he was crippled. He got hit by a car when he was younger, so he had a bad leg. But I didn't bother him too much. But it was his time, and I foolishly did what I did. But mistakes. I don't know. And of course, then we went away to college and got married, and Grandma came down and cleaned that apartment in Meadville.
Really?
Rach came down with her aprons and her gloves and all that stuff and cleaned that place. And when she cleaned something, it got clean. And of course, it's a rental property. It was terrible. It was terrible. And Gladys, of course, helped her, but I mean, it was Rach who was in charge of the cleanup of that apartment. And it was near the railroad tracks in Meadville. And Dad, he said, get out of this place. He said, I've already paid a month's rent. He said, how much it cost you? Well, I don't know what it was, about $60, I guess, something like that for a month's rent, furnished apartment. He said, I'll give you the $60, just get out of here. He did not like that place. When you went to the bathroom, your feet stuck out into the kitchen, it was quite a place. But for us kids, we couldn't afford much better anyway, and we were happy. And then veterans were all returning to school then, and so apartments were eaten up in Meadville because there were so many married kids coming to school. So you didn't have a lot of choices then. Real estate was at a high demand. And we had a good old Italian, Mrs. Tantilla, as a landlady, and first pizza we ever had in our life she made. Never you knew what it was. And they were good. They were good people. We made out. Dad didn't like it.
What did your parents think of Mom?
They liked her, yeah. They liked her. They knew her parents. C.S., her dad, used to come into Brookston with the Salvation Army Band on Saturday nights, and I guess he played an instrument and sang, and so she remembers him as a young girl, and he wasn't married then, but he ran a restaurant in Sheffield, and so she remembers him from that, and of course in Jamestown, and he had the market that was considered with the Swedes as good a market as any was. And so when my grandmother, and including then my mother, they were going to have company, you wouldn't go to your neighbor butcher shop, which every neighborhood had a butcher shop. You would go down to the public market, and you would buy from C.S. Carlson and get the best meat cuts that you could get, and you always could get it. So that was a tie there, and then all the mother's relatives all went to that church, the Magnusons, and all of them. So there was when we got married, we tied that church really together. I mean, we controlled that church because I had all my mother's cousins and all that stuff in the church, and then Gladys had all her family in that church. So this is a big, Stain and Eric, and when you put that crowd together, my relation and hers, there was nothing like it in that church. I mean, we were really, and I'd never been in that church in my life until I started going with her. But so that was when this was all put together, yeah, it was a right move and a right thing, and yeah.
Did they interfere at all in your dating life?
No, I used to have to, sometimes it's tough to get a car, and so we did a lot of walking, and I'd go date your mother up on that hill and I'd run. How I could do that, it had to be a 3 or 4 mile run, and I'd leave her at not the earliest hours, and then have to go to work the next morning at Nels, and I'd run from her house down Hospital Hill and down Lakeview Avenue all the way down and run.
Sounds like Brent, huh?
And I was let's see, I started as a senior, so I was 17, and I could, I don't know how I did it, really. Literally, I ran that whole way, down through the square, everything's closed, of course, and up through to home. Yeah. And, it was nothing disapproval on I don't think on either side, really. More, she didn't think I was religious enough. She could, because I wasn't a Baptist, and she, and of course she couldn't talk English and I couldn't talk Swedish, so we didn't make much of a meeting there, but she accepted it, and when we got married and we went over the day of our wedding, and she bid us goodbye and all this, because she didn't go to the wedding, she just was too old and stuff like that. But I mean, I think she accepted Gladys's choice, but I think probably if there was anybody that really kind of was a little hesitant, it would probably be more. And she didn't have a very strong vote, I don't think. Yeah. But that's about the only thing I read. And but certainly, she dated, I dated. I mean, it was all kinds of. From there on in, it was nothing steady about our relationship until 1949, really, or when she came back from Arizona, I think. And so there were, and mother she would say, now, and she'd think that, Gladys was not dating, and she was just being, sitting home, and I was doing all these things. Well, it wasn't true. Both of us were, But yeah, mother would say, I don't think this is right, that you got these other. In fact, there were some calls when she would shut them off, and she did that. And she said, and wouldn't even tell me that they called. Yeah. So there's a little protective thing there too. So and I don't, and I know Gladys's mom. She told Jerry, that would be Gunny's wife, that she came back from where I don't know, but to talk to Grandma Carlson, and she asked about what's Gladys going with anybody, because Frank Lynn, her brother, kind of had a shine on Gladys. He was older. Gladys said she didn't even know that, but Frank Lynn has said it even since then, and so he asked about Gladys, and Grandma Carlson said, well, she says, she's got this boy Lyle. She says it seems to be the one that she really is after, wants. So, and that was early in our arrangement. So, I think I don't think there was any upsets with any families. It was very good. So we started out with families. And in many cases you can have the division of families and stuff like that, and that's not easy when it happens. You kids never had that, and it's a good thing. But we didn't have it neither. So everybody was pleased and all that. So.
We're not for tonight's purposes. We're not going to go on how you met Mom and all that other stuff. We'll do that on another night, because I don't want to.
She was the aggressor.
Yeah, well, I think most women are. So she's downstairs. And she's told her side of the story. We've got that.
If I got
We're gonna hear your side later, but we won't do that tonight because
No.
we've worked you pretty hard here.
Yeah, no, that's good. I think, yeah, we've covered a lot of stuff about a lot of people, and it was, like they say, it was a good ride. We've had a lot of fun, and of course, then raising your family, that was special because you kids that put a dimension into our lives as well as your grandparents, and it was especially my side of the family because C.S. and them had grandkids, and they were older, and he was failing health. You never knew him as a healthy man at all, and but Otto and them were in prime shape, and there was nobody, you talked to Don Van Stee and all these, and Chuck Gustafson and that's all Otto could talk about was his grandkids. I mean, they were just they're perfect kids, and he idolized you kids, and they could never spend enough time. In fact, they didn't do much traveling. They went to Florida once a year, but they were basically home, and were you spent they babysat a lot, and of course we used other babysitters too in the relation, Rose, and you remember that, all that stuff we did. Everybody was willing to take care of you kids, and so it was good, and that was.
We were the greatest.
Well,
They
they were.
would fall asleep, and I'd be watching the boxing matches.
They were, yeah, that's right. They were more spoiled than I ever was. I'll tell you that. Otto, he especially.
Well,
And Grandma, of course, and then when Becky came along and had a little girl too, that was a special time in her life because that's just a natural phenomenon. You have a couple of boys and they're wonderful and all that stuff. There's no question about that. But the girl, that kind of finished the whole idea of the family, and that was it. We didn't have any more after that. So.
Was that by design? Should I ask you? That's a
Well,
question.
your mother's. I very frankly, I wanted more kids. I did, but your mother, no, she didn't want any more, and so that's the way it was. And, today, I don't know what. I don't know if she regrets it or not, to be honest with you. I don't know. But maybe we got a fine family. I mean, I don't think we need it anymore, but I was. In fact, when we got married, we were going to have, I don't know, we were 5, 6 kids or whatever it was. We were going to have a big family, but we didn't. I don't know. Your mom, she had, well, I don't know. Your birth was tough. Randy's was a piece of cake for her. That just boom. But then Becky's was tough too. So she had 2 tough births. And of course with you, she got knocked out. So then really, probably the toughest one was Becky because she did that natural more or less, And so that might have had some kind of a feeling for the thing. I mean, she's awake and did a lot of pain and so forth in delivering Becky. So that might have kind of put a damper on any more. I don't know. But she didn't want any more children. So. And a lot of people have accidental kids, go on and on and on, and they're planning. But we really planned to have a family, and we wanted them all birthed before we were 30 years old, and we made it right on a button because you want to grow up with the kids, and I think we pretty did. We were pretty young.
You did, yeah. You were young.
Yeah.
You didn't appreciate it at the time, but you saw guys like Larry John was the guy that was my age, and you saw his father.
Yeah, it was.
And my gosh, he was an old timer.
Well,
Larry's brother, Marvin.
Yeah.
Remember Marv?
I remember I remember the guy, but I mean.
Larry was probably 15 and Marv was 32.
Yeah. A lot of that. Well, same thing happened with Gladys. I mean, she never really knew Henry, the older brother. He was 16 or something like that when she was born, and it was in a couple when she's 2 or 3 years old. He's out of the house, and she really, really never knew Henry until I'd say mainly we got married really and started. We used to chum around a little bit together. We used to play cards together, and I'd say that was more of a connection with her brother than she ever had growing up. And Phil wasn't far behind. Ruth, of course, being the girl, she did. There wasn't so much, but yeah.
Back to your dad. Did he belong to any fraternal organizations?
Oh yeah. He was an elk.
Elk?
Yeah, he had an elk's tooth, that he had on his vest.
Really?
Yeah, oh yeah. And UCT.
UCT.
Yeah, he was a member of UCT, and I don't know if there was anything else or not.
Was he religious?
Well, they all went to church when they were kids, and big demand on that, and they were brought up in a Swedish church, and he knew Swedish. He was taught Swedish. They could handle Swedish. They weren't as affluent as probably Gladys' folk because they were second generation. But I don't know. He could read it, and he could because he took some extra classes even in school on Swedish. So they were mission, like you are. No, they were, and Grandma was mission also, and from Brookston. And I would say her family was more religious probably because certainly Gus Peterson wasn't. And the kids were away from Mom Mary before they had any. She had any influence. But Marie, she was an institution in the mission church. You know, she wouldn't think of going into a Lutheran church. I mean, that was bad. And Otto always said, you know, he said Marie's going to die in church, and by golly, she died in church. So and whole teens, you know, Julie and them. Oh my goodness, they were mission people. You know, very very religious. And but the boys, they weren't. I mean, Emil was treasurer of the Bethel Lutheran Church, charter member up there. And but Edith was the guiding thing there, and she went. And Emil, he participated through his wife. Put it that way, okay? Eric, no, David, they went to church, but not much, you know. And that's just the way it was. But in yeah, that was no, that was an important part of their life, I would say, no. And I went to, of course, I brought up Methodist because, and Dad and them started that. But Billy Swanson, who was a neighbor kid, he was going there. But Dad took Gordy and I and Bill to Sunday school, you know, all through our young age. I mean, he dropped us off. But then he was the guy. It was nobody else. Rudy didn't, or nobody else. And we'd run around and pick up the three of us, and we were the three guys that went to
Why
church.
Methodist church?
Confirmed. Because Billy Swanson, I think, he was a neighborhood kid, and he was going there, and him and I were buddies, and so I think that's how that started. So it was Epworth Methodist. So anything that happened with us kids, let's go. That's where parents would have to come to, and it was always the Epworth Methodist Church. Which
Did
was,
they attend church? Did your grandpa, grandma? No.
No. Rare, very rare. No. Well, for one thing, he'd come home, you know, on Friday night. And, you know, a couple of nights at home, and Sunday morning, you know, it was just, I mean, it was just a, they get me off
back
this,
on the road.
but and Monday he'd have to leave off on the road, so I think that had to play into it, and they weren't, they were believers, I know that, but I mean, they weren't, the church just, you know, it wasn't a big deal with them. They were married by a Methodist preacher, I think First Methodist Church, they were married. And, but the family's background was all mission, I know that. And well, we remember our reunion, we went to the mission church down there. That's where they all had their thing.
I didn't ask, were Fred and Hannah first generation? Did they come over?
Oh, they were from Sweden.
Or from Sweden?
Yeah, all of them were. You know, all my grandparents came from Sweden. On both sides, and Gladys, of course, both her maternal and paternal. They're all. So as far as purebloods go, you know, you just don't get any pureblood Swedes than us. I mean, and you and Becky and Randy, because there's just no linkage to anything else all the way through. And that's odd in a way, but well, it isn't so odd in Jamestown, I guess, because I grew up in what they call a Swedish Methodist, where they taught Swedish, sermons were in Swedish, and Gladys, of course, was brought up in the Swedish Baptist Church, which was taught, and they hung on to Swedish services longer than the Methodist did. But I got confirmed in the Methodist Church, of course. I was going there when I met her, and then the preacher called on my mother, wanted to know where I was, and she says, "Well, he's going with a girl in the Baptist Church," and he goes to the Baptist Church, and his Reverend Cook, and he says, "We got to get him out of the Navy and back in the Army, get out of that water." But it didn't work out that way. So that's the story on that. And your mother was so involved in her church where, you know,
No choice.
wasn't that I was at that much, you know. But I was going to church when I met her and all that stuff, because I played church basketball and all that stuff there. And, you know, you had to attend it. And then I would go to Cannell's right after Sunday school and go to work on Sundays. I worked down at Cannell's every Sunday through high school, but it was after Sunday school.
Did your mother have any social clubs?
You know, they're tied into their families. You know, they had quilting parties and coffee closets, and they would get into these ladies' aids things. You know, with it wasn't mother that would have them, but all the in fact, it was held down that before I ever went with Gladys, the church from Magnusson's and that would have their ladies' aid, and mother would go to them at that church because of the relation. And
And what church is that?
Swedish Baptist. Yeah, yeah. But not through the Carls. This was before that.
That was on Chandler
Yeah,
Street.
yeah. And Russell and Mildred, Doc, of course, didn't go to church, but Mildred did First Presbyterian Church. That's how Lee goes interested in First Presbyterian. And Rudy and them, they didn't go. But Joe got involved in some churches through different things, and Joe. And she's down at Buffalo Methodist and stuff like that. But that never really hung on very long, because Gordy then, of course, again was with us and was at the Epworth Church, so there wasn't much beyond that. So I can't say that we were a real religious group. That would be unfair to say. But there were some. I mean, like Dad's family. I mean, he had Marie and Julia. I told you all of that. They were, and Hannah. Hannah and Jenny were Methodists. And when Marie visited them in Ohio, in Youngstown, they had to drop her off at the Mission Church when they went to the Methodist Church. She wouldn't go with them to the Methodist Church. They're sisters. Oh, they used to think this was ridiculous, but that was Marie.
Yeah.
If you didn't go to Mission Church, you weren't.
What about politics?
Well, that's pretty good. That's pretty good, because there was a mix. There was, most of them were Republican, but Eric, he was a Democrat, and in that little voting section of Ludlow, and registration, there was one Democrat registered, one Democrat, and it was Eric, and he couldn't get a job in Ludlow because it was controlled by Connolly and those guys, and he lived a bum's life for years because of this, and then finally ended up as a ticket taker up there at Wildcat Park and stuff like this, and it was terrible. And I can remember Dad. I can remember being a part of it. Dad would tell him, Eric, you're crazy. Go register as Republican, but vote the way you want to vote. He said, I don't know how you're going to vote. You'd be damned. He was a Democrat, and he right to his dying day, he was a Democrat. And Amo, of course, was a staunch Republican. And Dad was, he had to play both sides of the fence. He was a Republican, but he was easygoing. Like he said on his windows, he'd have one for Wilkie, and on one side he'd have one for FDR. He could roll on, but he had to play the thing because he was dealing with different people in his territory and all that. So he was not as animate. And Uncle Doc, of course, was a Democrat, and Rudy was a Democrat, and Dick was a Democrat. So I guess you'd have to say, like, I know they made statements up at the ice skating rink that all the Swedes were Republicans, and Bob Hansen and I, we said, hey, boy, Don, you don't know what you're talking about, because we come from families where there were more Democrats. Bob Hansen, too. His dad was dyed in the wool, and they're factory workers, of course, in most cases, but I don't know if they were Democrat. But
Did anybody ever run for anything? Any active?
no, I don't think so. No. And I don't think they were. Fred Carlson, he was, of course, a Republican, and he used to hand out things at the schools, I think it was election things. He'd stand outside, and I can remember going to school, and there stood my grandfather standing outside handing out things for Sam Carlson. He was the mayor here for 26 straight years, and the one day that he really got active in this thing, and I remember it was such a downpour of rain, and poor Grandpa was out in front of my school, and that's when Carlson got beat.
Oh, golly.
And of course, Rudy and Russell and the sons they were just unmerciful on their dad about, that he helped, kidding them, losing an election. I mean, this guy had won, and Grandpa finally gets involved in this thing, and he gets beat. So that was the thing. But they by and large, I guess they were Democrats. I never really put it together till right now. But Otto was. He was a Republican, and when he got away from having to cater to people, then he was more of a Republican. And Eisenhower and all those guys, he was very staunch for that. But him and Doc, they would argue, that was mother's
What was
brother.
Grandma's side? I don't think I ever knew.
Well, they were more Democrats. Yeah, but CS would have been, and he was a Republican. But Henry and Phil to this day, are Democrats. Henry's, of course, no longer here. Harold was a dyed-in-the-wool Republican, and all his kids, friend Ron and Jimmy and all them, they are just
Well, they're sort of
Republican.
right of Attila the Hun.
Really Republican. Yeah, right, exactly. So, and Ruthie was come see, come saw. I don't know what Wilbur was, but Ruthie could, she would always say, "It's God's will, and we'll make out, fine." And that she was just accept things, and it was good politicians don't look at it that way. You know, if they're not in, it's not good. But that's the way it works. So I'd say that yeah, they were her side and Stain and Eric and them. I would guess they were all Democrats.
I don't know of anybody in either family that required that got political jobs or got jobs because of their politics, other than the Urick story. But I don't know if anybody in the political work for the city that required political appointments.
I don't think so. No, I don't think so. Henry was involved with the market master, and that was an appointee job, you know, and I think he tried to have some say in that because of in the later years he kind of run the market when CS went around. But I don't think that no, he had much influence on that. I think he talked a better game maybe, but I don't think so. But I've never understood Phil and Linda and Donnie, his kids. They're Republicans, especially Linda, and you know, Phil he sticks with it. He's that way. In fact, then you know you go into the next generation like Art and them guys. They were so Republican, and Gundy, the intellect, and Ethel, they're more Democrat. You know, and here he was a college professor and all that, which is not uncommon.
No, that's uncommon.
That's not uncommon. But he was, you know, he favors Democrats, and Art and them were so. Oh, they were just dyed-in-the-wool Republicans. He was a Goldwater man. Remember that?
Yeah.
And why? He was something. And Art's the guy that had the stories. It's too bad that he couldn't get him to interview him because he was the oldest boy, grandson. There's 19 of us grandkids, by the way. 19 of us. I was number 14, and he worked with Grandpa, you know, down on a farm in the summertime. And of course, you've heard that story where they were planting corn and bend over, putting them into little things, you know, and been out in the hot sun for hours doing this, and bend over. And Grandpa was doing the same thing. And all of a sudden, Art reached up and stretched his back, and Gus, he turned to him and he says, "What's wrong, Arthur?" you didn't take a break for nothing. You just kept right down and putting that corn in them things, you know. What's the matter? He just wanted to stretch his back. So, but he had stories about Grandpa because he was closer to him than anybody, working with him down there. He was the oldest boy.
I'm still expecting that bucket of goodies from Alice Holteen.
I wish you would get him because I tell you what. Now I've got a call from our cousin Bob, you know, and he's going to Kalmar, and wants to know. And I said, "Geez, you know, we were there 2 years ago in Kalmar, and we knew of nothing." But I said, "This Alice has got all kinds of stuff, and we don't know what she's got. She's supposed to get it to Greg." And I said, "He's maybe going to be doing something with this. We'll contact you later on that." But I said, "If something comes in, he's leaving July 7th for he's going to tour all the capitals of the Scandinavian countries, but not Iceland, but the other ones. And he's going into Russia and into Berlin. And he's all excited about it. He's going to be in Kalmar. Okay. And that's, of course, where our family comes from. And like I said, if we get anything, you know, I would call him immediately to tell him. But I said, I know of no relatives that we have.
I'll follow up with Alice because she was
Yeah, you'd
so
think
hot
you'd
to
have
do
by
that.
now, huh? Yeah, she was, oh my gosh, when she called me, she was...
And she got caught up in the holidays, and I haven't followed up on it.
I know.
She was going to make copies of all the pictures. That was her big project.
She did that?
She was going to.
Oh.
I mean, she's just going to take a massive effort to do that, and I was going to pay her to do that. So maybe that's what she's doing.
Well, probably is a family with her now? Or she's still on her own down there?
I think she's still on her own. I got her email. I'll get in touch.
Well, I'm sure she has some stuff that we don't know about. You know, and, we have cousins, you know, that out there in Minnesota and all that stuff there that we don't know about that are still alive. You know, that they're probably my age. In fact, there's some pictures of these people right here. And
I've got some of that stuff at the office. Some the copies she sent us when we were doing the videos.
Mm-hmm. Well, have you got enough?
Today.
Today?
Did you tell him about Grandpa Fred's grocery store and how you used to go in there as gas station?
Well, I don't know, yeah. Fred had a gas station. Grandpa Fred, that was in the Carlson side. And it was quite an operation. You know. He didn't know.
Where was this?
It was down on Faulkner Street, right near his house, about 4 doors down on the other side. And he ran it. He had sold candy in there, had a little bread, pop, and stuff like that, and gas. Didn't do any mechanic work at all. He didn't know how. He ran it for Erickson Oil Company, And so us kids, when he'd want to go home for supper, to his house, which was only about 4, he'd have Gordy or I take care, or usually the two of us take care of the store while he's gone. And so we did, and I many times took care of it myself. And I had some real experiences down there. An oil can, a guy wanted a quart of oil, and he's put it in the car. So I'm looking around, I found out where the oil goes in, and you push the can down in the container, and the hose was up like this, and then you did, open the hose. Well, the hose was laying down, I didn't realize that, and of course I put the quart in there, and the whole quart of oil went right out into the driveway. So that wasn't a good experience, and the guy realized I didn't know what I was doing. But when he'd come back from us taking care of the store, he would tell us, "You kids can have a little candy now." That was our payment. And we were baseball collectors of cards. And so while we were there, Gordy and I would stand there and we'd open up all the cards real carefully and then put the guys that we needed, not only for our collection, but ones we could trade, into a certain packs. And then we'd lay them on the side. And then Fred would come back and say, "You kids can have 10 cents worth of things." Okay, so we'd take these 2 packs of baseball cards. Well, we had an inside track, gosh, you couldn't beat that. So we were able to trade, and that was the ones with the character type, if you remember that, that you've seen those cards.
30s.
And I did anyway. Because I think I did a lot more than Gordy did. I had a real good collection of cards. All gone now.
1930, 38.
38, when that, it was a real different, because all the time before there'd been regular pictures, and this came out as a face, but a character body. And, they were special. But we took care of his gas station, and one time then he had new pop came in, and he invited everybody into the thing. They would go down and buy their gas. All Doc and Dad and everybody would buy their gas from him, of course, and he'd treat. And he's like, "Our new pop today," and he wanted all have. So he got his dirty old glasses out and put them all out there, and he didn't realize it was club soda. And he poured everybody a glass of club soda. Well, you can't drink that stuff. And, oh, Fred, and then he of course tried it too. Oh. He says that was terrible. That wasn't pop, as he knew it. He didn't. He found out then. And people come in and buy a little gas, and he gave the kids a bag of candy. So any money he made selling the gas, he lost. He balanced it was giving the candy away. So he never made any money on it. He was a poor operator.
What about the fudgicle sticks that Dan had?
Oh, that was the other. That was Magnuson's had a store up on during the Depression again. We get back to that up on. Newland, Cora Newland, and she baked stuff in there. Aunt Hannah, that was my mother's aunt, and they had a grocery store in front. And Carolyn and I, we would go up there and visit, and Mother and Dad would go in the back where they lived and sit, and Carolyn would be in charge of the store. And so then we'd sit there, the two of us, nobody coming around. We'd go open up the fudgicle, in the ice box there, and pull the sticks out until we found a free one. And then we would put that back in, and then I'd go into my dad and say, "I'm going to buy a nickel for a fudgesicle." Well, okay, you give me a nickel. Well, then I'd get 2. See, Carolyn, she'd find one and say, and we'd pull them things apart. I don't think anybody ever caught on to it because we were very careful with it. We got to learn how to be careful to do it.
Statute of limitations or something?
Well, you had to survive,
Depression, sure.
You snuck into ball games, and chase balls, all this sort of stuff down there. Circus, I've told you those stories where the guy would say, you go to him, and we learned it from the older guys. This was our idea. And we'd say, "Hey, you're going to need help after the circus, tear it down?" Yeah, to handle ropes and all that stuff. And, okay, give us a free ticket, that was part of it. They give us a ticket. He said, "You kids you gotta leave something here, so I know you're coming back." Well, we were wise to this. He says, "Leave a billfold, watch, everything else." We didn't have it, we knew what we were gonna do. And he'd say, "Well, you gotta leave something." He said, "I'm not gonna let you in without something." Well, take a belt off, or I don't know what the other kids, but I remember leaving a belt down there. Belt I didn't want, leave the belt. We get the ticket, go and watch the circus, go home. And, that wasn't the right thing to do, but ice skating, we used to jump the fences down there, so we'd have 10 cents for candy. I think it cost probably a dime to skate, and that's all you had was a dime. But if you wanted a mallow cup or something like that, you had to figure a way of doing it. So jump over the snow fence and skate, and then you have a dime for the. It did that.
Were you given an allowance?
I don't remember that I did. You get pennies. Come home at noon, and that was a trick there. You always came home for lunch because you just didn't have cafeterias then, except high school. And you come home, and then mother would give me a penny, and you go down and you could buy one of them dollars or 2 green leaves for a penny, and eat them on the way. It's got to be your dessert from lunch, and that was about it. A penny. You never, no, nothing big. And like I told you, for big gift would be the ice skates, which probably cost $6-7. It was the biggest thing I got. Aunt Rose bought them for me. And my dog, $6. Big things. So you didn't live. You get one gift for Christmas. It wasn't anything like what goes on today. I'll tell you that. Yeah. And I can't remember ever getting any money. I just don't think I did. High tops. Gordy talks about them too. We all got high tops. And they had a little thing on the side. You remember your brothers had them too. And we kept the jackknife in there, and that was big, boy, when you had them high tops. God, uncomfortable, but we loved them. It was a thing to have.
Tell me about Chris Hansen ice skating.
Well, yeah, these are sort of sidelights, but he was down at Rosen. Rosen was very, very big. It was that whole compound was the ice skating rink, and we'd be, there wasn't really good lights, but it was lit up. It was good enough. But out in the far end of it, we would crack the whip, and do all these things, play tag. It was that big a rink. And Chris Hansen would get on the speaker down, and he says, "You kids, cut that out there." He says, "I'm coming out now and get you." Well, he didn't have skates. He had old, galoshes. And by the time, of course, he walked across that rink and we were all gone. There was no activity at all when he got out. He never caught anybody. But he announced, "You kids, cut that out. I'm coming out and get you." He never got anybody, but he was there every night. He was the director of recreation, and Rosen was the big rink. Allen Park was the small rink, and he was up here too, but he was mainly down there at, and then of course at night they flooded it after we got done skating. We skated every night, and the weekends we would skate like Saturday afternoon, say Sunday afternoon primarily. There was always skate in the afternoon, and it would be soft at Roseland, and you couldn't skate. Allen Park, the elevation up here was higher. You could skate at Allen Park. So us kids, of course, we'd hike up here, skate in the afternoon on Sunday because they had ice, and Sunday night, the rink would be okay at Roseland. We'd go back down there and skate. So it just really lived at it. It was.
And no matter how cold it
passion.
was.
Oh yeah, it was. If we ever knew wind chill factors. We would have never gone out in this stuff because you didn't know. It would be 4 or 5 below zero, and you'd be down there skating, and you can imagine what it was on a windy night.
Sure.
And you never wore a hat. Muffs, they were a big thing. Earmuffs, you wore them, but that was it. Your hair would be just like icicles when you come off the rink, and then walk home. I had a long walk up there, but I never missed. And I've worked at Gannell's then. I'd still get home and eat real quick, and go, and I'd carry books home. And my dad always said, "What do you bring them home for? Just to balance your body?" I'd lay it on the dining room table, Next morning I'd take it and away I go. And schoolwork suffered them years, there's no question about that.
What was a standard meal?
Oh, we ate good. I've told your mother that too, that I don't know, she's never made this, and I don't know how we did. We had a lot of veal stew. And that was a big, and I loved it, and we had it. And of course, that was a depression meal, And my dad, of course, loved fish. Mother makes salmon cakes and codfish and all this stuff here, which I didn't partake in. She'd have to cater to me a little bit on those meals. I didn't like that stuff, but Dad did, and he loved chicken. He could eat a half a chicken. He loved chicken. But no, we ate good. We always had food. There was no question about that. And yes.
What was your favorite meal?
Well, it was fried ham. That was a meal she used to make. Fried ham.
Mm-hmm.
Get a slice of ham, fry it, and then potatoes, and cream gravy, and then corn on the cob.
Mm-hmm.
And that was.
Well, grass slurk.
And we grow that. Had that grass lick on your potato, onion grass.
Yeah.
That was the number one meal. Spaghetti always is a big meal because we had a real Italian recipe that Aunt Jill got from a neighbor in Palermo's, and the spaghetti was very good. I learned to love that. But,
What was breakfast like?
that was an adventure. Otto would get up early in the morning. He was an early riser. He'd go down and make oatmeal, and by the time I got down, it was just one great big clock. It was terrible, and he was reading the papers that time. He paid no attention to me, but he'd made my breakfast. And Rach was the one he allowed to stay in bed on those mornings. In fact, then of course at Gannell's, I used to have to be down at Gannell's at 6. we opened the store at 6. This was in the summer times, and you know, and he'd get up. Mother wouldn't get up at those ungodly hours, but he would get up, and he always felt it his duty to make that breakfast. But it wasn't a chore for him because he was an early riser, and but it was instantly made the oatmeal. And by the time I got washed up and got cleaned up and come down and ate, it was just like a big clog of.
Did they go to bed early?
No, but I'd say, you know, I don't know what our bedtimes were back in those days, maybe 10 o'clock, you know. Later years, he was just like we are now. He'd sit up and listen to the news, you know. He'd go to bed at 11 or after 11, but in those days, you know, but he was an early riser.
Yeah.
And I think Mother was reasonably, she didn't, but he was the first one up always. He was used to that. So, yeah. And well, he did some later life. He did some things around the kitchen too, you know. And like Mother always said, if the sink was clean, he felt the house was clean.
Yeah.
He would put Bon Ami or, you know, in that sink and scrub it. And as far as he's concerned, the house is clean.
He wasn't a.
No. He didn't run vacuums and stuff like that. Mother, she was a bug for cleaning, you know that. And she would move furniture around. And he later life, he'd come up here to Gladys and he said, "Oh, you know, Rach is on a warpath over there with his cleaning business. He just ducked out of the house. Come over here."
Tell a story about how he forgot her one time.
He did what now?
He forgot her. Remember, he was pulled out. He was going to pick her up to the front of the house, and he drove the car and took off without her. Forgot to.
I remember that. That must have been when you were kids.
Yeah,
you remember that, yeah?
He just took off. He went to see us, and then Grandma called and was very mad. You know, he's supposed to go to the store with her. And
oh, okay.
He just left her.
He took off.
Well, tell him about your car that you bought and took Aunt Ring and your mother.
Well,
took
that
a
guy,
shower.
though, I've told you that. I met him, you know, that I bought the car from, Harry Thurber, and down in the hospital. He's on oxygen and in real bad shape. And then I seen him at Christmas time. He's sitting with Ray Hammerstead in the Lutheran home. And he's a guy that he's had emphysema and he really suffered with it. And he told me then that he says, "I should sue you, Lyle." And I said, "What are you talking about here?" He's the guy that sold me this car. I thought he was referring to the car. And he says, "You sold me cigarettes, and that's why I'm in the condition I'm in." And it was true. I mean, I worked at the cigar shop, and I never smoked. The whole time I was down there as a kid, I never smoked. I was one of the only ones. Everybody was bunking with cigarettes, kids and what have you in those days, but I never did. I smoked, started when I was in the Navy, but I was not down there. But
Tell him about the car.
you know, he sold me a '34 Chevy Coupe, had a rumble seat.
That was your first car?
Yeah, I paid $125 for it, and it was a Chevy, and the ignition was on he'd done these things. Harry had it, you know, you turned the ignition on with a heater switch. You didn't need a key. You just turned the heater, and the windows were cardboard. So if you want to close the windows, you lifted up this cardboard. There's no window on the sides. So the windshield was there, and this car had electrical problems. You never knew when it was going to start. And I was so proud of that car, and I took Aunt Rang and Rach. They were going down to my grandma's house on Faulkner Street, and I said, "Let me give you a lift," and you ought to, you know, Rang. And I crawled in that car, and you know, and I said, "Come on, get in here." And they were big women, and they sat up front with me because they couldn't get in the rumble seat, of course. So we were just like squashed. And so instead of going down the hill off of Price Street toward Grandma's house, I headed up Price Street, and they both were, "Where are we going?" And especially Rang. I said, "I'm going to take you for a little ride." Well, okay, we went up and got up to Lakeview Cemetery. The car quit. As far away as we could be. And of course, did I get it from Rang. Oh my God. Well, make a long story short, we went to somebody's house, made a call, and Otto came up and picked them up and then pushed me home. And this happened 4 or 5 times. And finally he said, "Get rid of this thing." When he says, "Any loss you incur, I will make up." And I took it over to this Palermo again. The family taught us how to make spaghetti. He had a garage over near the 6th Street Bridge. And I took it over there and put a for sale sign on it. And I was $100. And I went over there. Carl called me. He says, "There's a guy here who wants to buy this thing." He said, "Get over here." So I came over there, and he says, "What kind of money do you want?" And Carl says, "Wait a minute, I'm going to show Lyle something." You know, he was a smart, Joe guy, and he lifted up the hood, and in the grease of the motor block, you know, which was about that thick, he wrote in there with a screwdriver, 1, 2, 5. I was going to ask 100. See? So I said, well, I gotta have $125. He'd filled them out.
Oh, yeah.
And he said, oh, well, that was okay with him. So Carl,
Get your money.
and he wrote it into grease on the car. Clever. So, and I think I gave him $10 or something like that for storing the car over there it was only there a few days, but I got rid of it. And,
That was your first car?
that was my first car. And I must have been about and why I did that, how I did that, I won $250 on the treasure tickets. Warren Linquist and I won $500 together.
Wow.
And so we got,
That was huge money.
and it was big money. And I come home and I was so proud and tell my dad, and he thought it was great. My mother was so mad. She was fit to spit nails.
Gambling.
Because here her son, she didn't want me to work again else, you know. They came and got me. I didn't apply for that job. They came and got me. And I got that job and went to work down there, and she thought this was terrible. And a place like that, you know, and she used to go buy it when she'd go. She'd never been in the store. But I said, Ma, I gotta have that job. And so I took it. And I hadn't worked there more than a couple of years, and somehow conversation come up what we would do with our life, and I told her then that I didn't want to do anything but work again down in Carl. And she started to cry again. So when you talk about things, she said, oh, this is terrible to think that that's what I had an ambition of working at a cigar shop. But anyway, we had a lot of fun down there. So, and that's another part of the life. And I off and on, I worked there for about 6 years. Between Navy and college and back and forth, you know. And Russ always found something for me to do. You know, I mean, it was as soon as I got back, he'd have a job for me. So it was good.
Well, as of right this second, the tape is going bump, bump, bump.
Good deal.
2
And
hours.
how long does that tape run?
2 hours. You've done 2 hours of good talking. So, and we aren't even done. We're not even
No.
halfway done. We're just.
Did you get through your album?
No.
Well, a lot
we
of
got
it,
sidetracked.
a lot of it, you know.
Tape.
We got into everything. Your family and
Well, it's not supposed to be my.
I know that,
fault.
but we couldn't help but get into
You
it.
you stick to the
Well, I know,
subject.
but it just slipped.